Hello everyone and welcome to the new session of online English class with your teacher Sir Roy. Today I'm going to discuss with you a short story titled The Ransom of Red Chief, written by O. Henry. Before I get into the story, let me tell you a little bit about the writer. O. Henry was the pen name of William Sidney Porter, who was an American short story writer. In addition to short stories, he wrote poetry and non-fiction. His stories are known for their wit and humor. They're very funny, hilarious. His stories have a twist in the tail. They have surprise endings. Now let's turn our attention to the title of the story, The Ransom of Red Chief. I'm sure the majority of you know the meaning of the word ransom, but for those who don't, the word ransom means the money you pay in exchange for the release of a prisoner or a person who has been kidnapped. Red Chief refers to chief of a Red Indian tribe. I'll tell you more about it later in the story. Let's now take a look at the four characters in the story. First, we have Sam and Bill. They are small-time crooks, petty criminals, and they carry out a kidnapping. Next, we have Johnny. He's a 10-year-old boy with red hair, and he's the victim of kidnapping. And finally, we have Mr. Ebenezer Dorset, who is Johnny's father, and he is an influential citizen. There you have the four characters. Now, let me tell you the story in brief. So, stay tuned. During their stay in the state of Alabama, Bill and Sam decided to carry out a kidnapping. Now, Alabama is one of the 50 states that constitute the United States of America. Now, why did they want to carry out a kidnapping? Well, Bill and Sam had $600 with them, but they needed another $2,000 in order to conclude an illegal land deal in the state of Illinois. Now, Illinois, like Alabama, is one of the 50 states that constitute the United States of America. Now, what is an illegal land deal? When you want to buy a piece of land whose ownership is disputed, and you want to buy it illegally at a cheap price, it becomes an illegal land deal. I hope you get the point. Now, Bill and Sam chose for their victim the only son of an influential citizen named Ebenezer Dorset in a small town called Summit. Now, why the only son? Well, you understand that the parents of an only son will be willing to do anything. They will be ready to go to any extent to get back their son if he is kidnapped. They'll be willing to pay any amount as ransom to get their son back. Now, why an influential citizen? Well, an influential person is rich and powerful. Now, only a rich person can afford to pay $2,000 as ransom. What is the point of kidnapping the son of a poor man who won't be able to pay the ransom? I hope you get the point. So one evening, after it became dark, Bill and Sam drove past Mr. Ebenezer's house in a horse-drawn carriage. They saw the boy out in the street throwing rocks at a cat on the opposite fence. Now, this will give you an idea as to what kind of boy Johnny was. He was a very naughty, very mischievous kid. To say that he was naughty and mischievous would be a gross understatement. Now, this will become obvious to you as the story progresses and unfolds. Now, it was Bill who first tried to tempt the boy, to lure the boy with an offer of candy and a ride in the carriage. He went up to the boy and asked him whether he would like to have some candy and whether he would like to go with them for a ride in the carriage. Now look at the reaction of the boy. Usually a 10-year-old boy will be scared of a stranger. But Johnny, he was not scared of Bill and Sam. What he did, he picked up a piece of brick and threw it at Bill. And that piece of brick caught Bill neatly in the eye. It must have been very, very painful for Bill. And he muttered under his breath that because of the boy's misdemeanor, his misconduct, it was going to cost his father an additional $500. Initially, they had decided to ask for $200 as ransom, but because of the way the boy behaved, because of the way he hurt Bill, he was going to raise the amount to $2,500. Now, it wasn't easy for Bill and Sam to kidnap the boy. Johnny put up a tough fight. He fought like a wild animal. But then in the end, he was overpowered by Bill and Sam, who bundled him into the carriage and drove away. Now, where did they take the boy? Well, 2 miles away from the town of Summit, there was a mountain covered with cedar trees. Now, cedar are evergreen trees. They are like pine trees. And on the back of the mountain, there was a cave. They decided to use the cave as their hideout. They had already stored supplies in the cave, which they would require during their stay in the cave. So they took the boy straight to the cave. There, Sam left Bill with the boy, and then he went down the mountain to return the carriage. The carriage did not belong to them. They had hired it from a nearby village. So Sam went to the village to return the carriage. On his return, he found the boy with 2 large bird feathers stuck in his hair, and he carried a stick, which he pretended was a gun. Now, the boy began to call himself the Red Chief. We all know that children are gifted with lively, fertile imaginations. They enjoy playing roles of imaginary characters. So, Johnny took on the role of the Red Chief. He was the chief of a Red Indian army. And then he assigned to Bill the role of Old Hank the Trapper. Now, who is the trapper? A trapper is a person who hunts wild animals for their furs and skins. And then he assigned to Sam the role of Paleface and Snake Eye. Now, a paleface is a term used by Native Americans for Europeans. And then Snake Eye is an imaginary character. It is the fictional character from a comic book. Now, basically, Johnny, he was the boss because he was the chief of a Red Indian tribe. And the other two, Bill and Sam, they were his adversaries, his enemies. And he threatened them with punishment. He threatened that he was going to scalp Bill at daybreak. Now, do you know what scalping is? To scalp is to cut off the top of a person's head. And then he warned Sam that he was going to burn him at the stake at sunrise. But then Bill and Sam did not take Johnny very seriously. They thought that it was all a game for the boy. They thought that the boy was kidding. But then it was obvious to them that the boy was enjoying himself immensely in their company. Even though he was their prisoner, even though he was a victim of kidnapping, he had no fear of his kidnappers. He was having the time of his life. He was having a rollicking time. After that, they had dinner. At dinner time, the boy stuffed his mouth with bacon, bread, and gravy. Now, what is bacon? Bacon is pork. It is the meat cut from a pig's sides and back. Now, while they were having dinner, the boy began to talk about random things. It was obvious that he was a very, very talkative boy. He was rattling away. And from time to time, he would get up and then he would tiptoe to the mouth of the cave and he would look out to see whether there were any enemy soldiers or not. And from time to time, he let out war cries. He shouted so loudly that it sent shivers down Bill's spine. Bill was now terrified. He was frightened of the boy. Then Sam asked the boy whether he was feeling homesick or not, whether he wanted to return home, whether he was missing his parents or not. What the boy said took both the kidnappers by surprise. To their amazement, they learned from the boy that he did not want to return home. He hated school. He wanted to spend more time with his two kidnappers. After that, at around 11 o'clock, they all went to sleep. Next, Sam was awakened by a series of terrifying screams. He jumped out of bed. And then what he saw scared the daylights out of him. He saw that the boy was sitting on Bill's chest. He was grabbing Bill's hair with one hand, and in the other hand he had a knife and he was trying to scalp Bill. So it was not an empty threat. And no wonder Bill was terrified. He was screaming hysterically. So Sam had to come to Bill's rescue. He snatched away the knife from the boy's hand and that way he was able to rescue Bill. But after that, Bill's spirit was broken. He was depressed and dejected. After some time, Sam, he dozed off, but Bill could not sleep even a wink. He kept his eyes open because he didn't know what the boy was going to do next. After some time, Sam remembered that the boy had threatened to burn him at the stake at sunrise. So he sat up, lit his pipe, and then he leaned against a rock. He tried to put up a brave front, but Bill realized that Sam was nervous. After some time, Sam asked Bill and the boy to prepare breakfast. He said that he was going to the top of the mountain to have a look around. So Sam went to the peak of the mountain, and from there he surveyed the scene. He wanted to find out whether a search party was out looking for Johnny or not. But he found everything very peaceful. There were no signs of any commotion. So he concluded that Johnny's disappearance was perhaps not detected by anybody. So he returned to the cave. Now, when he returned, he could see that trouble was brewing between Bill and Johnny. Bill complained to Sam that in his absence, the boy had put a hot potato down his back and had crushed it with his foot. In retaliation, Bill boxed the boy's ears, and the boy had a rock in his hand and he was threatening to hit Bill with that rock. The boy said that he was the rat chief and nobody should mess with him, and he also threatened to fix Bill. He said that he was going to teach Bill a lesson. After that, they had breakfast, and then Bill and Sam, they were having a discussion. Then they saw that the boy, he was going out with a sling in his hand. I'm sure you know what a sling is. Probably you remember the biblical story of David and Goliath. You know that David killed Goliath with a sling. So the boy went out with the sling in his hand. Now, Bill, he felt that the boy might try to escape. But Sam reassured him, saying that, well, the boy enjoyed their company. He did not want to return home. So there was no question of the boy running away from them. After some time, the boy entered the cave with a loud war cry. And then they saw that the boy was whirling the, the sling over his head. He was moving the sling in a circle over his head. Sam realized what the boy was going to do, so he ducked in time. But Bill was slow in reacting. And then Bill was hit by a rock as large as an egg. And he fell with a thud into the fire across a frying pan of boiling water. Again, Sam had to come to Bill's rescue. He had to pick him up and pour water on him for about half an hour so that he would not get blisters. After that, Sam caught hold of the boy and then he shook him violently and threatened him that unless he behaved himself, he was going to return the boy to his parents. Then the boy mellowed down. He said that he would behave himself, but he blamed Bill for everything. He said that he would behave himself, only he should not be returned to his parents. At this point, Sam realized that the boy was turning out to be a nuisance. They would have to get rid of the boy at the earliest. So what he did, he sat down to write a letter to Mr. Ebenezer. In the letter, he mentioned that Johnny was with them, that they were far away from Summit, which was a lie. And then he mentioned the time and the place where Mr. Ebenezer should send his reply. He also said that unless Mr. Ebenezer agreed to pay the ransom, he would never see his son again. Now, at the request of Bill, Sam reduced the ransom amount from $2,000 to $1,500. This was done because Bill felt that Mr. Ebenezer might not pay $2,000 for his son, wayward son. They just wanted to get rid of Johnny at the earliest. So they reduced the ransom amount. Instead of demanding $2,000, they were now asking for $1,500. And then Sam mentioned in the letter the landmark, the place where Mr. Ebenezer should send his reply and the ransom amount. He said that there was a creek known as Owl Creek. Now, do you know the meaning of the word creek? A creek is a small stream. So beyond the stream, there is a place called Poplar Cove. And near Poplar Cove, there was a wheat field. It was encircled by a fence. And close to the fence, there were 3 large trees. So Sam mentioned that Mr. Ebenezer should send a messenger with the reply. And the messenger would find a fence post just opposite the 3rd tree. And at the bottom of the fence post, there was a box. And the reply should be kept in that box. And the time was 8:30 in the evening. After that, he took the letter to the post office at Poplar Cove. There he heard an old man saying that Johnny's disappearance had been noticed, that the inhabitants of Summit, they were worried about his disappearance, and this is exactly what he wanted to hear. He was very pleased that now Johnny's parents and the neighbors, they were looking for him. So he came back and then he waited for the appointed hour. Just before 8:30, he went to those 3 large trees. Then he climbed up the 3rd tree and he hid himself well. It was a large tree, so there were a lot of branches and leaves. From there, he kept an eye on the road. And very soon, just as the clock struck 8:30, he could see a boy coming up the road on a bicycle. The boy pulled up near the fence post. He slipped a piece of paper into the box and then he rode back to Summit. Sam made sure that everything was safe, that no one was watching him. Then he climbed down the tree, went to the fence post. He retrieved that piece of paper, then went back to the cave. In the cave, he began to read that reply that he had received from Mr. Ebenezer. Both Sam and Bill, they were in for a surprise. The reply contained a bombshell. This was something that they were not expecting. In his reply, Mr. Ebenezer mentioned that he knew his son very well. He could understand that his son had become a nuisance for the 2 abductors, and they were desperate to get rid of Johnny. So he made a counter proposal. He said, I'm not going to pay $1,500 for the release of my son. Instead, you have to pay me $250 if you want to return my son to me. Now, when Sam read this piece of information, he was about to explode with anger. But then he looked at his companion. He looked at Bill, and there was a pitiable expression on his face. Bill pleaded with Sam that they should agree to Mr. Ebenezer's condition. He said, well, we have the money. What is $250? Let us agree to Mr. Ebenezer's condition. Let us return the boy along with $250. If I have to spend one more night with the boy, I'll go insane. He'll drive me crazy. I'll go bonkers. And Sam found himself agreeing with Bill. He also had had enough of the boy. The boy had become a living nightmare for both of them. They just wanted to dump the boy. So they decided that they would return the boy along with $250. But then they found it very difficult to convince the boy to return home. The boy was unwilling to return home. Then they had to tell him a lie. They told Johnny that his father had bought him a gun and the next day they would go hunting, that they would hunt bears. Only then the boy agreed because he thought that he was going to have adventure with the two kidnappers. So at the stroke of midnight, Bill and Sam, they arrived at Mr. Ebenezer's doorstep along with Johnny. They handed over Johnny to Mr. Ebenezer, and Bill counted out $250 and gave it to him. But their ordeal was not yet over. The boy realized that he had been tricked by Bill and Sam. So he refused to let Bill go. He clung onto his leg. And Bill found it difficult to run away from there. He asked Mr. Ebenezer Dorset to restrain his son for some time so that he would be able to run away from the place. Mr. Ebenezer said he would be able to control his son only for 10 minutes. Bill told him that that was enough for him. So as Mr. Ebenezer restrained Johnny, Bill took to his heels. He began to run for his dear life. He was a big man, he was a fat man, but he was running as if he was being chased by a mad dog. Now Sam was a good runner, but he found it difficult to keep pace with Bill. And within 10 minutes, they were far beyond the reach of the boy. And that's how the story ends. Now, here, the funny thing about the story is that the two kidnappers, they became the victim of their own crime. In the end, they had to run away from their victim. Just imagine two grown-up men who were abductors, who were kidnappers. They were running away from their victim. And they had to pay $250 to Mr. Ebenezer instead of getting $2,000 from him. Now, one more thing you should take note of is that Bill and Sam, they were small-time crooks. They were petty criminals, not hardened criminals. That is the reason why they treated the boy well. They didn't do any physical harm to the boy. When they took him to the cave, they did not tie up his hands. They left him free. The boy could do whatever he liked. In fact, it was Bill and Sam who suffered immensely at the hands of Johnny. And that's where the story becomes funny and hilarious. I hope you have enjoyed listening to the story. Please read the text if you want to enjoy the story more. And I think this explanation will prove useful to you. If you'd like to get any clarification, if you have any doubts, you can always get in touch with me. I'd love to hear feedback from you. You can always leave a comment in the comment section below. That's all for today. Take care of yourself and bye for now.